$250,000 on non-economic damages.
I think a cap on non-economic damages of $250,000 makes some sense for most of the states in the United States because they're such a soft and squishy type of damages and difficult to determine. I think that makes some sense.
It's an arbitrary number that bears no relationship to the harm that the plaintiff suffered, and also it has a disproportionate impact on people in certain situations.
If you've been blinded, permanently disabled, disfigured in some way, or you're a woman and your reproductive system has been harmed in some way, those injuries are non-economic in nature, and someone deserves to be compensated for that.
They're identical twins, but there's nothing really very identical about them. I mean, Connor's pretty much a normal boy. I mean, he grew up and played baseball and soccer and, you know, just did what boys normally do. And Colin, on the other hand, he grew up, first surgery, I think, was when he was
one.
He had to have eye surgery.
There was optical nerve damage in the brain injury.
Part of the brain injury, so he doesn't see real well. And then he started having to go to therapy when he was about 2. I think we started taking therapy. And that was pretty intense. And they finally got him to where he could hold his head up and then where he could sit up. And then as he grew older, he's obviously mentally delayed.
He didn't even know the days of the week.
The jury heard the evidence and they said, okay, well, we're $5.6 million, I think, is probably what he needs. And that was close. We could have made that work. I mean, that would have been enough money that you'd have people to take care of him, if work on or whatever. He'd been okay for the rest of his life. And then the cap comes in and says, no, that's not right. You get this amount of money and then, you know, pay your lawyers out of that and pay some medical bills. And so Colin ends up with a few $100,000. And so what happens is then he goes on the Medicaid and the taxpayers have to pick up the bill for his care.
Dad, what? It's falling apart.
It is. Is in your hand all dirty?
No.
Oh, it didn't probably do that.
It's not just an economic need, there are moral issues involved here. And what a cap does is it relieves the wrongdoer, often a company or a healthcare provider, of the responsibility they have for the damage that they caused.
Medical groups like the Nebraska Medical Association applauded the Nebraska Supreme Court's decision Friday. They say it will keep malpractice insurance costs down for doctors, and that in turn will keep down medical costs.
When states enact caps on damages, doctors' insurance premiums typically do not go down.
And it's interesting that when these various limitations are enacted in various states, there's never a requirement that the insurance companies pass any savings along to the policyholder.
The insurance companies are charging still a lot of money to doctors in Nebraska, and they're not having to pay out very much money in Nebraska. So what are they? They're making, it's their little pot of gold.
The insurance industry says, well, don't look at us. It's not our fault that rates are going up. It's all those juries and judges and lawyers and victims that are suing us. It's all their fault.
Those excessive jury awards cost us all money, and it's part of where there's rising costs in the healthcare system.
If it was true that medical malpractice litigation actually drove up healthcare costs, then we would expect that since 2003, when basically no patient was allowed to hold a doctor or hospital accountable anymore in Texas, we would expect that healthcare costs, healthcare spending would go down. Well, in fact, the opposite is true. Healthcare spending has been going up in Texas at a rate higher than the national average since we restricted patients' rights to access the courthouse. So the myth just doesn't jive with reality.
Over these years, there's a whole lot of things that I want to say about caps, and to say just how they've affected us doesn't really, I don't know, it doesn't really hit the nail on the head so much. I mean, they've affected us obviously. I mean, we have a son who will never be able to grow up and earn his own living, never go off to college, never have his own family. He'll require care for the rest of his life. And so, how does the cap affect you? It makes his future unknown. I mean, you have this person that you're responsible for and that you love, that you don't know if you're gone, what's going to happen to them. I mean, if it's your child, take your child and say, you're gone, and give them to the state and let the state do whatever they want with them. And is that what you want for your child? That's not what I want for my child. Especially when your child can't ever grow up and take care of themselves. They're relying on people to take care of them. So that's how the cap affects you.
I know that. No.
In many respects, these laws violate state constitutional provisions that protect people's rights. And in order to protect those new laws against challenge in the courts, the business community decided that it was important to them to stack the deck in their favor with the Supreme Courts of various states. They wanted their own set of judges who would be deciding whether these restrictions on people's rights would be upheld.
Watch out, Snake. Watch out, Snickers.
Like Grisham books, some of them anyway. When was it? This was written 2 years ago. John decided to write the appeal. He talked to me about it because he wanted me to help him get the details right in the book. He likes the books to be accurate. It's interesting because it sort of tracks what I went through. It's about a Mississippi Supreme Court justice running for re-election and being attacked by these out-of-state big business interest groups that are coming in trying to defeat the incumbent Supreme Court justice so that they can get their corporate interests on the court. So, yeah.
As the legislature would try to affect tort reform, if it did get into law, then it came down to the courts to decide whether that law was constitutional. And there started to be decisions around the country that said that these laws were not constitutional, that they went too far.
So then the businesses said, well, we can't pass those laws. What we can do is to try and have judges who decide these cases be really conservative, business-oriented judges.
Karl Rove developed this plan and worked with the Chamber of Commerce to influence the outcome of key judicial races around the country. They put in place a pretty aggressive campaign, ranking which states are most important for them to be in, and putting tens of millions of dollars a year into these elections that often had tiny amounts of money.
I started getting calls from Karl in the middle to late 1980s as he began his work representing, at the beginning, state Supreme Court candidates in Texas. Rove was able to put together a franchise, basically, to elect Republicans who he was representing, with a guarantee that they would have well-financed races, and business interests got Supreme Court judges who were going to rule their way on business cases and on tort cases. By the time you reach the 1990s, this core of conservative, Republican, tort-minded judges were ruling overwhelmingly for some of the largest corporate interests in Texas.
It's a model that they used and they exported to other states. It's a good payoff. It's a good payoff. You put money in a judicial race, you spend $100,000 to help challenge a judicial candidate, it can have literally $1 million impact on your company.
And it seems that that's happening more and more throughout the country, that our state Supreme Courts are reversing civil juries in this country at an unprecedented level after seeing the gifts of millions of dollars.
Last week, the Supreme Court reversed a century of law that I believe will open the floodgates for special interests, including foreign corporations, to spend without limit in our elections.
If you get 5 people in our state, we have 9, so the majority is 5.